The full River and Mycospawn experience. February school vacation came yet again, and for the last time in my pre-collegiate academic life. River and I planned to consume twice the amount of Mycospawn than we usually did, and we would spend most of the experience on the trails of Rollywoods, the first place I ever consumed Mycospawn 2.5 years prior. It was intense to think about how far I had come in my power usage career, and I was ready to get to a new level of quote-unquote mastery by consuming my strongest amount of Mycospawn yet. There would be no doubt this time about whether a full effect had been achieved, the amount surely enough to allow psilocytes a skip and a hop through our neurochemical gates. River and I were both equipped with backpacks packed with our water bottles, as well as E-Pod Js loaded with whatever we thought would be the best soundtracks for our trek through the deserted wintry forest. I already had my album of choice to listen to, my first album titled Purple and Green, which I had recently finished making. I knew that the undeniably joyous and peaceful vibes of the album would serve me well, and it'd be hard to fall down a spiral of panic and mistrust with psilocytes, with something so familiar to cling to. We were told that these Mycospawn originated from somewhere in the Gulf Coast, allegedly, for whatever that's worth. Perhaps their equatorial essence had brought some heat to the local weather, because we were gifted with an unusually warm February day. There wasn't much snow, but enough to watch it melt, and enough to require hiking boots for the muddy terrain. We were ready to carry on with the day's events, and consumed our Mycospawn portions at 10 a.m. in my family's kitchen. Within 15 minutes we started to laugh about any random conversation that came up, and I started to notice the high-definition cartoonish look to everything that psilocytes had granted me in my past experiences. A light, physical anxiety had set in for both of us, so we decided that psilocytes wanted us to start our journey to Rollywoods. On the walk through town to get to the forest, I noticed that all the houses looked exaggerated in the same cartoon way my kitchen was, as if their dimensions were drawn freehand and their colour was the result of a paint bucket tool. The cars looked like playful robots as they zoomed by, as if they were fixed on an automated energy track. I was reminded of the visuals I enjoyed that previous summer, when I consumed a modest amount of Mycospawn and met up with Earl and Ernie at Dunkin. I was acclimated to the weirdness enough, but once we reached the forest, I could tell in my body that psilocytes had begun his full reign. It was time to pop the earbuds in and start listening to Purple and Green. The album was intended to be good vibes for anyone like me, anyone who enjoyed audible companions during trips into the great unknown, and this was the test. I started the first track, Warm Heart Wins, a schmaltzy, cute track, lamenting the frequent poor health of my girlfriend at the time, embarrassing but wholesomely founded. As the intro chimed in, I looked to my right and spotted a swan in the river. Though it was difficult to tell at first, this was indeed a real swan, and as the swan swam, I saw purple and green stripes of light trail its back end, like it was creating its own purple and green rainbow. The vision brought me ecstasy, undeniably a good omen from the great unknown, as if this was my reward for honouring psilocyte's bestowal of the purple and green wisdom 2 years prior during my sunrise hike. If psilocytes really is an entity with extended jurisdiction over reality at large, it would make sense that he'd reward me for having taken his wisdom seriously and incarnating it into an album of songs. The communion was strong, and I could tell this would be a triumphant day for me and River. Even with the serious emotional energy of Warm Heart Wins, the scene became comedic as our fascination with the swan quickly turned to playful fear when the swan changed its trajectory toward us head-on. There River and I were, in the woods at 10:45, 2 18-year-old fellas, giggling, and running away from a swan that was still quite far in the distance. It all felt like a music video from the late 2000s. Of course, the imagery had nothing to do with the lyrical content of the song, but that juxtaposition is what made it humorous. We got back to the path and moved onward. My album went through Stardust Eyes and Kendragon, two trance-type beats with quixotic vibes, and I felt my awareness float through the air on the vessel of music. When I got to Psychic Fox, I closed my eyes and saw geometric arrangements of violet and pink shaded ellipses rotating and swinging off each other's ends, like a slow mechanical process that maintained a sacred magical hive of electricity. It was incredibly peaceful, so much so that I only stopped closing my eyes because we had to keep moving on the path. Outwardly, I continued to see similar patterns in the ice and the trees, with extra vibrant electric blues and browns. We arrived at an opening in the forest where there sat a single tree illuminated by a beam of light. I realized that my album was almost over, so I reckoned we had gone through a lot of the journey already. After doing the math, though, I realized that the album was actually only 23 minutes long, and we had covered very little distance. I had given myself completely to the emotional progression of the music, and let myself be in sheer awe of how Silicites had brought it to life. I had been carried blissfully through the forest in a mystical wave that distorted time. I noticed that the tree before us was surrounded by slightly different shades of brown leaves only recently revealed by the day's snow melt. As I fixed my gaze on these dead leaves, they vividly appeared as magazine cutouts of various human facial profiles. The faces were all bald and seemed to represent every nationality I could think of. The vision was so powerful that for 30 seconds I couldn't see the leaves as anything else but a collage of African, Indian, Asian and European shades and faces. The images were so vivid that I began to worry they might not go away. Perhaps I had crossed too far into the great unknown and would now see things distorted for the rest of my life. I decided to look away and shifted my gaze to the tree that the leaves surrounded. The bark on the tree tessellated in a similar way to the leaves, but these faces were blockier and more so resembled Aztec and Mayan hieroglyphs. It struck me that it was plausible to think that the hieroglyphs of the Aztecs and Mayans were at least influenced by Mycospawn consumption, if not created, while under the influence. Perhaps these were spiritual entities, Silicites used for communication, divine imagery that symbolically relayed something ineffable about the fundamental nature of existence. With the tessellation of different ethnicities in the leaves, I saw how all humans were a part of a greater whole, a sacred macrocosmic unity of all possible human experience. We had the power within us to create and preserve this unity despite our perceived differences, and we could harmonize. It struck me that these faces could be the incarnations of lost souls, or in other words, the souls of dead people, encrypted in nature. Whatever it was, I deemed it sacred, and understood the message was to promote tendencies of positivity and inclusivity, because in the end, or in the great unknown, all energy comes back to a coexistence, a communion. After we had gone through this rush of feeling and seeing, River and I decided we would head down to the river to consume some green power. I looked at River as we spoke, and I saw translucent flashes of his skull through his skin, the transience of it like a desert mirage. As River prepared the green power, I put on a song by a classmate of mine, a guy by the name of Patrick Parkman, who went under the musical moniker Patty P-Man. I had always had a complicated relationship with his music as a simple reaction to how it had achieved much more attention than mine. He took the essentials of hip-hop and made it as white as could be. He portrayed himself as a baller who worked at a cafe, took life in the slow lane, and all the while maintained a suave relationship with the ladies. For the most part, I couldn't stand it. Still, being someone who appreciates well-constructed music and sound waves in general, I occasionally listened to it to see if my opinion would change. Surely enough, as I played his music while we got the green power ready, I felt a major sense of relief come over me. I realised that I had been overtly critical about what I noticed in Patty P. Man's music, and that there was actually plenty to celebrate in virtue of his easygoing vibe. Patty P. Man was just being himself, like I was, and it was never meant to be a competition. Sure, his music was popular with the crowd, but I had to accept that it was only a matter of the crowd's interest, and not an objective measure of the quality of either of our projects. I could continue to work on my brand of experimental electro-pop music and still be happy for Patty P. Man and the success he had already achieved. As my Patty P. Man revelations came and went, I caught myself staring at the flowing river and watched it ripple into a replica of an Alex Gray painting, Bardo Being. It brought to mind Terence McKenna's machine elves of the TMD realm, and I felt I understood the essence of what I was seeing. At the very least, it was a visual display of faces in the perfect tessellation. The vision felt sacred, like I had caught a glimpse into some mechanism of the firmament of our reality. Everywhere I looked, I could see pleasant faces forming, as if every natural entity had its own collection of spirits. There were smiles in the water, as well as faces and stray eyes in the trees and in the sky. There was the audience to what was happening before me, perhaps an audience that was always there, however hidden. I didn't worry about knowing the truth about what I was seeing, for how could it be knowable? The green power didn't end up doing much to me, as its power in the face of psilocytes was ultimately a small thing. Green power was a spirited aspect of reality, for sure, but everything was spirited at this point, and I saw no way it could throw me any curveballs that the Mycospawn hadn't already pitched. Everything that existed needed each other to exist, for without the opposite of any particular quality, the former wouldn't be fathomable. Everything needed a reference point from which to differentiate. For example, a sense of hot wouldn't exist if things never got cold, and vice versa. One couldn't tell if a tree was hard if one had never felt anything soft. Everything was codependent in one shape or form. If anything, the green power made us feel sluggish and had slowed our pace with yawns all around. Perhaps we were dehydrated, or the Mycospawn had run some trick for our course, but we decided to turn back and head toward my house. We felt as though the peak of the Mycospawn had been reached, and it was time to come down from it all and rest. As we made our way back, I found myself with an absolutely positive outlook on life. I realized how beyond great my family was, how I was lucky to have a girlfriend who loved me as much as she seemed to, and how I was already all set to go to college in the next year. If all went well, then I'd make a bunch of money and have a family. It was all so exciting in its idealistic form. The sense of family as a circle of loving individuals really hit home in an authentic way that it hadn't before, as if some great consciousness had signalled to me the real virtue of maintaining circles of loving individuals. River had similar revelations, and however uninformed our expectations were about the chapters of college life and beyond, we stood confident and proud of how far we had come. The only problem we couldn't shake as we exited the forest was the fact that we both noticed our hands were swollen. We weren't sure if it might be a serious medical problem and speculated as to whether it was a trick of psilocytes, or perhaps it was only the cold, but the hand fatness sure seemed real. As we walked through town, we walked by this old guy with a huge bushy moustache. When I looked at him, It looked like his eyes were the same distance apart as a frog's. Not only that, but he had eyes stacked on his eyes to make him a proper, four-eyed being. In a weird flash of an instant, I saw his jaw and moustache sag straight down to the ground. Of course this happened in Silasite's own discreet way of illusions, the visual occurring in a flash that doesn't hold enough permanence to warrant concern about one's mental state, however bizarre. I wasn't sure where Silasites was going with that choice of visual content. Anyway, I moved past it with some defensive laughter, because what else would I do? When we made it home, the opening of the door felt like it had us back to square one, like the whole experience we just had could have been a dream. Maybe we had never actually left the house. Regardless, there was no time to consider such matters, and we went online to search swollen hands with Mycospawn. Luckily, there was a power forum with an extensive database, and there was another person who had posted about this problem before. The quick and dirty of it was that we had experienced a change in blood pressure due to minor vascular constriction, and with no help from dehydration and being in the cold. All we had to do was drink water and warm up. The simple answer made us laugh with a sigh of relief, and we agreed to get big glasses of water to chill with in the living room. You heard it here. Be careful of vascular constriction while consuming Mycospawn. As I drank the water, the gulping sounds combined with the icy, cleansing tastelessness in a way that evoked a dolphin-esque spirit of water from the coldest and cleanest oceans. River confirmed this sensation as he sat opposite of me on the couch while I rested on my dad's old recliner. We were half in the Silasites realm and half in the normal realm, it seemed, though the normal realm was surely on its way to overpowering what was left of Silasites playing about in our heads. We rested in silence as the floral wallpaper designs occasioned faces and other geometric patterns, as did the trees and sky out the window. It was 2:30, so we had experienced 4 hours of Mycospawn in our systems, and certainly had arrived at the lessening of the effects. The next few hours would likely be a sort of in-out, in-out. I decided to take a shower and left River downstairs. When I looked at myself naked in the mirror, I didn't really see myself as attractive, nor ugly, but an average-looking teenage human boy, an example of the simple flesh and blood of human life. The outline of my ribcage appeared to have a light glow. The shower proved to wash away the majority of what was left of Silasites, but a dull headache persisted for the rest of the evening. The true wisdom of this trip was a much-needed reminder I've received from a lot of my past Mycospawn and DSL experiences. The virtuous path is to have complete acceptance of what life throws, as well as to recognize the beauty of all existence. Everything that peacefully means well deserves respect, and there is a real spirituality to understanding a sense of everlasting interconnectedness. Purple and green had run its full course and proved to be a touching companion for Mycospawn-fueled exploration in the forest. For me, it was a true landmark, my strongest Mycospawn experience yet, a couple months into being 18 years old, the supposed entrance into adulthood. Unfortunately, this wisdom was enough for me to foolishly consider myself a proper adult at the time, despite only being in my adulthood's infancy. It seemed that however spiritually powerful the influence of the green power, Mycospawn, DSL, and Salvarada experiences were, the cock-headed audacity of an 18-year-old male such as myself could still peek through and triumph over the temporary cognitive leaps of power consumption's past.